Today, we have with us the renowned Canadian architect, Brigitte Shim. She formed the architectural design practice Shim-Sutcliffe Architects in 1994 with her husband, A. Howard Sutcliffe. Their critical design practice reflects their shared interest in and passion for the integration and interrelated scales of architecture, landscape, and interior and industrial design. Welcome, Brigitte.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also nice to see some friendly faces. I met Father Gilbert quite a few years ago when I lectured at Detroit Mercy at his architecture school there. So, so thank you so much for the invitation. And I guess I, wanted to just share some kind of thoughts on light in architecture, which is really a fundamental dimension of our work. We're always trying to explore light and see how we can capture and manipulate and amplify light. And then I'll just share a few different projects that really reflect a range of different faiths. So an interdenominational chapel, a synagogue, a chapel for a group of Catholic nuns, and a Taoist temple. And so it really is not any one religion, but really a kind of pretty broad cross section. And I would probably begin by saying that we would never consider ourselves the designers of religious spaces or sacred spaces. I would say each one of these projects kind of happened in a very specific circumstance, but it's kind of it's sort of a bit surprising to us that over the years they are a body of work that really addresses the sacred, the spiritual, and then also the modern at the same time. So it's a kind of a slightly odd grouping of buildings. And I would say one of the things we've worked really hard at is really working with each of the communities to listen really carefully, to really work from the bottom up and really talk to all of the community members to listen to hear what they wanted in their spiritual space and thinking about how we could actually help them realize their vision. So so this is can you see the screen? Yeah, so this is a very early study model. This is of the congregation Bet Am, which is a Reform congregation in Portland, Maine. And in a way, I think it's just a light study. So we often work with physical models in our studio, and the power of light, the kind of meaning of light is really fundamental. And what you'll see in every project is it's actually addressed in very different ways. So there's no one solution. So let me just see how we can. Okay. So in a way, one of our challenges is we live in Canada, and in a way, we're always trying to amplify our winter light and shade ourselves from the harsh summer light. So this is a very internalized project in a laneway, but whether it's a sacred space or not, we're always thinking about light in every project that we work on. This is a kind of dining hall for a camp for inner city kids. It's a summer only facility, but here we're using off-the-shelf greenhouse glazing combined with glue lamp frames. You can see the wood glue lamp frames and then the steel rods to really create, in effect, what we would call a kind of a light-filled space. So all of the little wood pieces are actually 2x4s, which is very common, very much part of North American construction. And their role is really as a light monitor. So you have this kind of greenhouse glazing up above that opens up, motorized. It's very utilitarian. So they use it for these large industrial greenhouses. And we just applied it to this dining hall. And then we added this kind of other layer that are the wood pieces that become a register of the light coming in. And very simple construction, and it's been around for a while. in a way, this is a very recent project where we're using a series of Douglas fir clad trusses combined with clear story windows. So where the light is coming from, there's no view, and the view is on the right-hand side, but we're trying to really bring the light into the project and using the structure and the light together to kind of really create the kind of a meaningful space. And we're always trying to link light and nature, which is an ongoing interest for us. So this is a view of a project where, in effect, the light, the color is actually coming from the natural environment on the outside, the kind of verdant Carolinian forest, which is on the exterior, and the way that, in effect, we're really trying to link nature and culture, and always interweaving these two things in our work. So this kind of idea that you're not adding color as like a paint, you're actually using nature to actually literally be the color. And then we really live at 43 degrees latitude in a seasonal climatic zone. So we're always trying to harness light as a force to help us continually recalibrate our understanding of place and context. So as architects, I would say we're always wanting to paint with light. And this is a kind of example of a project called the Integral House, but this is actually taken in January. So you're really seeing this very low raking winter light and how it penetrates right into the spaces, which is really different than other latitudes. So it's something very specific to where we live. And we're always trying to capture this kind of qualities all year round, but winter is a very special season, very specific to where we are, and really something we love to celebrate and amplify. So the first project is actually a chapel. It's called the St. Catherine's Chapel. It sits in a place called Massey College. There's an architect named Ron Tom, who is a West Coast architect. He won a big competition, and he designed this graduate college. So what you're looking at is the courtyard. This photo was probably taken in the early 60s. The clock tower that you can see on the right, and the building at the very end is actually the common hall, the dining rooms, all of the public facilities. And what you're seeing on the left-hand side are the graduate residences. So 3 or 4 people have bedrooms, and they share a common bathroom. There's a kind of series of scissor stairs up the back, and all the rooms for all the residents look into this courtyard. So we've been the college architects. We were the college architects for about 2 decades. We worked with one of the masters, and we added a library, a lot of accessibility. When it was designed, it was a male-only college, so we had to, female washrooms, elevators, really making it just much more accessible than it was before. And part of that was a chapel. So here you can see the current view of the college, and it's one of the beloved buildings in Canada. And my husband Howard worked for Ron Tom, and then we were asked to be the college architects. So we added new gates and wood storage, because they have all these fireplaces, so a lot of specific things. And this is the new west gate that we added because it was not handicapped accessible, and this provided a new entry point that was able to deal with strollers and wheelchairs and all that stuff. So here you can see some of the wood storage that we provided for all the fireplaces throughout Massey College. We designed a garden for the master, so this did not exist. So the kind of raised fountains and everything were new pieces that were inserted into something that was already there. And this is some of the new work that we did, providing very small ramps and places to sit, and then the Robertson Davies Library at the lower level. So this was really very much a utilitarian space. It had a concrete floor and a kind of a T-bar ceiling and metal shelving. And so we turned it into a kind of new library within an existing space. And then the chapels. The chapel was actually a kind of existing chapel. It was designed by a theater set designer named Tanya Moiseyevich, who presented and designed some of the stages at Stratford. And it was sort of really in not great shape. And so we worked within the footprint of what was there. So you can see we added a slate floor. The brick walls are the same as the walls up above. And these are a series of barrel vaults clad in wood. And then we're always trying to integrate the lighting within the architecture. So this is a 40-person non-denominational chapel. So you can see the existing walls of the college on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, there used to be pebbles, like little rocks. I think they wanted it to feel like a grotto. We actually felt the acoustics were really important. So these are actually fabric panels that allow them to put artwork up, but also changes the tonal quality of the space. And you can see the blue wall, and there's a kind of Byzantine altar that was donated by one of the previous masters. We selected the chairs by a Canadian female furniture designer, Patty Johnson, and they work really well. So this is where their choir practices, they have weddings, they have non-denominational services. And I think this was also designated as one of the Queen's chapels, and it's connected now to the First Nations, and it's a very special place in Toronto. So here you can see the way the lighting becomes part of the whole experience, and so that was the very first sacred space that we designed, and again, a renovation of something that already existed. We were asked by a congregation in Portland, Maine, to design a reform synagogue, and we spent a lot of time with them, understanding who they were. They were already in an existing Portland public school that they rented, and they couldn't do any more with the space that they had. It was programmed 7 days a week, and they took the school, and their renovation included a sanctuary, social hall, and their religious school, all in this one 2-story red brick public school. And so it was a challenging project to really be able to, with a limited budget, really create the kind of community that they really wanted to enhance. So for all of their high holidays like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, they rented the local church nearby. And in a way, it was kind of such a bad fit, because who they were and the way that the church was designed was totally the opposite of the kind of spirit of what they wanted to capture. When we worked on this project, there was an amazing female rabbi, Rabbi Dubinsky, who you can see here, and a really amazing volunteer group that were the board. They were really amazing and so committed to really questioning, how do we build community was the bigger question. And in a way, for us, as I mentioned before, light was really essential. And what we observed is that the same group would be in their sacred space on a Friday evening, and they would welcome the sunset, which was the beginning of the Sabbath. And that same group would be in the same space on Saturday morning for another service. So in a way, we were watching the fact that the kind of the same group would be in the space was the same, but the light was something we felt could change from early morning to evening, and that transformation would be really powerful and really impactful for this really amazing dynamic group of Reform Judaism. So here's an early sketch of early morning light, and then thinking about what light might look like at sunset, and early studies where we're trying to think about how light can become embedded in their everyday lives, and thinking about the way that also they wanted to view nature. So in a way, one of the things that was hard in the existing Portland red brick public school is that the window openings were a certain scale, and they really wanted nature to come in, because they felt there was a link between their liturgy and the natural world, and they wanted to be able to view and experience it as part of the changing seasons, the way the Torah worked through the seasons, and that they could view, in effect, outside as part of the kind of the daily liturgy. So here's some early study models that we built, again, trying to think about the way light comes in. And you can see none of them are really fancy, but they're really trying to experiment and explore a kind of ideas. And then you saw this one at the very beginning, where in effect, we're really trying to use a combination of clear story windows, which are the kind of high up vertical windows, as well as skylights, as well as an angled baffle to shape light from morning to night. So it's a pretty simple devices, but it becomes a register of time. And here's actually a very technical drawing, but you can see the combination of the clear story, which is on the angle, and then the skylight, which is slightly tilted to drain the rain off. And sometimes in the day, the light is behind this angled baffle, and sometimes it's above the angled baffle. So it becomes a way to tell time as you kind of are in the space. And then you can see all the mechanical stuff higher up. And then sometimes we have benches and things integrated into these areas. So here's a site plan, a site model. And on the left, you can see the kind of rectangle is actually the existing Portland Public School. It sits on the corner. And so what we did is we renovated that whole building that was the public school, and we turned it into their Hebrew school. And they use every floor, and they have different grades. And so we kind of almost renovated it back to a school, which is what it was before, after they had made all these renovations into the synagogue. And then what you're seeing in terms of the green roof is actually the sanctuary and social hall combined. The little wedge at the bottom is actually their offices, washrooms, the rabbi's office, and then a library, which is at the very end. And then what you can see is an urban courtyard on the left-hand side between the existing building and the new building, and then a reflecting pool on the right-hand side and a garden. And it sits at the edge of a public park. There's a Dunkin' Donuts nearby. It's kind of in a slightly suburban part of South Portland. So really the fence and the landscape was really to situate it, create kind of buffers so that the traffic noises wouldn't impact them, and also create this contained landscape that was very community-based, and all the congregation. There's an amazing garden committee that actually does all of the work of maintaining the garden. So here's the plan, and what you can see is where the chairs are is actually the sanctuary. So what happens in like many religious groups, during the week, they might have somewhere between 150 and 250 people coming on a daily to services on a Friday night or a Saturday morning. But then a few times a year, they have high holidays, and they need 700-800 people to be considered welcoming. And so what happens is you can see the way it's laid out is for regular services with views out to the reflecting pool in the garden. And then the left-hand side of the space, which is equivalent, is actually the social hall. So they'll have their service, and then right afterwards, they'll have a whole meal. You can see there's a kind of little rectangle in the upper portion, which is actually the kitchen. So what happens is the kitchen has deliveries, it can make all its own noise, and then there's a connector to the social hall. So there's a whole issue of acoustics, and so the service can go on, the kitchen can be doing prep, and then they can be getting everything ready in the social hall, and everybody moves from the sanctuary to the social hall. And you can see that hallway down the bottom with the library, the rabbi's office, all the washrooms. And then where the hatch places is the existing Portland Public School. And then number 1 is the entry courtyard between the two buildings. So here we're looking at from the public park, and you can see the kind of synagogue, the fence, the synagogue, and then in the back, you can see the 2-story red brick Portland Public School. And then this is from Westbrook Street. So you can see the new complex on the right and the public school. And one of the things we did is that they had an entrance off of Westbrook Street that was really dangerous, traffic problems all the time. And we flipped the entrance and the parking to the other side. So you had to come in off of a side street, and it just made traffic a lot better. And it meant that you could just enter into this courtyard that was between the two buildings, and then proceed into the kind of sanctuary. So it was really trying to solve some really fundamental problems about where the access to the public school was. So here's the entry courtyard. So here on the left-hand side, you're seeing the social hall that opens up to become part of the main space when you have high holidays. So Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, all of the kind of big holidays. On the right-hand side is the entrance, and if this was a wider pan, you would see the public school there. But we wanted to create one entrance. So this entrance that you're seeing is the entrance both to the Sanctuary Social Hall and the new and the Hebrew school that we renovated. So they didn't want to have multiple entry points. They wanted to really contain it. And I think issues of security are kind of a big deal for all kinds of groups. This is a drawing, but this is actually showing the journey. So one of the things we did is we had a lot of discussions about, how do you leave your everyday busy life and how do you prepare yourself to enter a sacred space? And so we have this hallway on the right-hand side is the rabbi's office, the library, and this is the kind of threshold before you enter the sacred space. So we wanted it to be full of lights. You can see the way that the kind of structure continues and the light comes down. We actually clad it with a clapboard, which is actually like a local wood, very New England. It's also tilted, and then it extends outside, and it's an opportunity to view the landscape. So people sit and gather, they get together with their friends. People in the congregation who have small children will often be here during a service, and they'll be nearby, but their kids can run around. So it actually acts as this kind of buffer zone. So kind of coming down this hallway is kind of leaving your everyday life and then actually getting ready to enter the sacred space. So here's a view of that hallway. So you can see the two doors, one to the social hall, the other to the sanctuary, and in the distance, the landscape. And again, this is a view of that space, simple benches, just to allow people to sit, but really also to connect to the landscape, to view the garden. And so the water is also part of your experience, even before you enter the sacred space. So here's a section where you can see that space we were looking at is off to the right. You can see we're cutting through the main sanctuary and we're looking at the garden. And what you have to notice is that it's actually asymmetrical. So the left section is different from the right section. And this is really deliberate because the latitude of Portland, Maine, the issue of bringing the sunset into the project, we actually made it asymmetrical so that for very special reasons that I'll explain in a second. So here's a view. So here we are in the garden looking back at the very space that we were looking at before. You can see how the corridor widens up. You can see the clear story skylight. And this is the sanctuary portion where they have this great outdoor space. They often have a lot of services out there, a lot of weddings, where that outdoor covered terrace really works for them. And then the reflecting pool, which we work with water a lot, and it was kind of a fundamental part of the whole project from the very beginning. So here's a view from the outside looking back in at one of the kind of events in the sanctuary. And you can see the kind of connection between inside and outside. And then in the summer, you can see this kind of beautiful garden that is really so bottom up, so community based, and really, the kind of committee work on it is amazing. And they do all of the garden work. They pick all the plant materials, and they maintain everything. So this is the full space. So when they have a high holiday, we actually take the sanctuary, the altar, the bima, and they relocate it from one side to the center, and they set up all their chairs in such a way that every person is no more than 4 rows from the reading table. So it's actually done long ways, as opposed to like the church that they used to rent all the time, where there was one person at the top and everyone sitting back, and you were in row 23. So the shallowness of the space really allows everyone to be really close to the rabbi, and it's really for them fundamental to who they are as a community. And then what happens is that this is when it's actually a sanctuary social hall, and each of those wooden elements is actually got storage in it for chairs and for all the different things that they need. And then they can move each of those sections into the bays when they have their high holidays. and they know way in advance for the next 20 years what every high holiday is. So there's a little crew that does all the work and then recenters and prepares it for the high holidays. And then they'll have their social events in different rooms in the Hebrew school and other parts of the building. So for those special events, they recalibrate everything. And then this setup would be more like a regular time. And so here you can see each of these bays, they're related to the structure and also light, how light comes in. And we're looking toward the urban courtyard, which is the entrance between the public school and the new building. And then here you can see the way they're set up. So we designed the reading table, the kind of near tamid, which is the kind of gauzy piece that comes down, and then the storage for all of their Torahs, which is right on the wooden box on the wall. So all those pieces get relocated for all their high holidays to the center of the whole space. And then they use, sort of moving chairs, and they can set up for 700 to 800 people for those times of the year. And here's a sense of the kind of dusk. So there's actually also artificial light up in those areas. So there's a kind of glow and there's a kind of experience at nighttime. And then during the day, we wanted, so for the clapboard that we used in the main space, we actually flipped the clapboard. So normally, if you know, in New England, the clapboard, one layer overlaps the other and you get these lines of shadow. And we actually flipped it so that we actually were able to get lines of light. So you can see the lines of light that's coming down into the space. Here's a bit closer where at certain times of the day, it's not about the shadow, but it's actually about the light. And so you can almost tell from your clock, you can use this to measure the time of the day. And then I was explaining before the asymmetry between one side and the other. So this is the east side on the right and the west side on the left. And the west is how the sun comes into the building at sunset. And so we designed the asymmetry so that the Torahs in the middle of winter at sunset would actually be illuminated. And in a way, it's such a key document for the whole congregation. They actually have a Holocaust Torah that should have been a kind of destroyed during the war, and it was saved and kept. And so they have pieces that are their day-to-day Torahs, but they're also very special ones. So they actually store 3 Torahs here. And in a way, this kind of idea that it would actually get natural light in winter was kind of very much part of modeling and angling it so that there was a kind of natural light that would actually illuminate the most important documents for the group. And here outside, you can see the sense of these lines of light that were really, for us, important. And then a view in the winter where you're seeing, in effect, there's a parking lot on the right. You can see the public school in the distance, the new building, the garden, and then we created a kind of wooden fence around it to really contain the space so that, it was kind of slightly separate from the public park, but visually connected. And here's a view in the winter from the sacred space looking out. And then there, different times of the liturgy related to the Torah, they dance in the space, they go in and outside in the space, they really use it in a whole variety of ways. And then this is like the unwrapping of the Torah for certain ceremonies. And so the space is pretty flexible and really has allowed them to do so many different things that really are so connected to their own liturgy. And so there's some really beautiful dimensions, they build structures and they unroll things. So in a way, we really saw the space as enabling them to do things that were so much connected to how they wanted to connect to what is a very ancient religion. And in a way, I would say in the previous renovation of the public school that they did years ago, it didn't facilitate that at all. The space hampered their ability to kind of do the things they wanted to do. So this is one of the kind of different events that they had outside on the public terrace. So covered, but outside. So now I'm going to shift to a project we did for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Toronto. And I don't know if there are any Sisters of St. Joseph's that are part of your group. No, they're a really amazing group of women. So they arrived in Toronto from, I guess, the west coast of France in 1858. And they really focused on women's education and healthcare. And they have really made a huge difference in the city. So the image on the left is one of their first monasteries in downtown Toronto. And the image on the right is actually a facility called Morrow Park, which was built in 1960. And at that time, they had over 500 novitiates in their order. And so they have a really amazing kind of history and contribution to the city. In Toronto, I don't know how well you know it, but the CN Tower would be kind of down by the water. And what the two green kind of tentacles you're seeing is the Humber on the left and the Don River on the right. So these two ravines really were there pre any human settlement. They were how the First Nations moved throughout this whole landscape. And in a way, our site is on the Don, which is on the right, and we're really overlooking one of the ravines. And it's kind of important because the sisters selected, so we were hired before they had a site and before they actually had a program for their building. So we looked at a whole series of sites. Some, most of them said no, 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 and they really wanted to be next to nature. And so they rejected a whole bunch of them that were former Catholic school sites throughout Toronto. They said they felt too hemmed in and they wanted a relationship to the natural landscape, which was for them really fundamental. And they also told us they wanted the greenest building they could afford. So being environmentally sensitive was kind of part of their core values, but they were also at the same time very fiscally responsible. So it was the greenest building they could afford, because if they couldn't afford it, they weren't going to do it. And so this kind of gives the scope of what we PV panels, green roofs, cisterns, geothermal, and every item we priced umpteen times during the process. Can we afford it? Can we not? We built in all the infrastructure. We kept monitoring the prices. We did life cycle costing to really make sure that everything that is there was what they could both afford to put in as capital costs, but afford to maintain in the long run. And then we worked with sustainability consultants to figure out what the payback time was for each of these items. And then luckily, as we were from the time we started construction to the time we had to make decisions, certain things like the PV panels dropped in price dramatically, certain things, so we really monitored them to be able to try to get them everything they wanted within a price range that was kind of workable. So here you can see the site is a kind of very residential neighborhood on the right-hand side, mostly post-war 1950s, little houses. And then you can see the Don Valley, which if you think about that aerial photograph, it's the one of the two river valleys. And so what you're seeing is that the brown building there is actually what's called the Taylor House. It was built in 1858. So it's around the same time the sisters arrived in Toronto. This was a really grand house. And then when we first started, the sisters asked, can we move it? They actually said, we don't really have a connection to this house. We said, this is the only heritage house in this whole part of Toronto, and we don't think it's a good idea to demolish it or to move it. And so we worked for about a year to figure out how to integrate it into the overall complex. So they use it as a library, meeting rooms, they have guest rooms upstairs, and then a few offices, but it's connected to the whole overall complex. This is a sketch of the chapel, and really we spent a lot of time with them discussing the importance of water and light. So the chapel sits in a reflecting pool, there are ramps, and so a lot of their Easter ceremonies can take place outside and come inside. And again, they wanted this indoor-outdoor condition. So if you look at this axonometric, there's kind of a portion that is a double loaded, what we would call a double loaded corridor in the middle, and then two wings that I would say are single loaded. So a single loaded corridor has a hallway and a series of rooms. And when you're walking down the hallway, you're actually looking at the city and the neighborhood. The portion in the middle is a double loaded corridor, and on one side might be rehab, physio, nursing stations. So the middle is actually double, and then the two wings are actually single. And here's a view from a kind of aerial view. So you can see the Don Valley, there are expressways, it's all a kind of natural land. And then you can see the green roof of the chapel, it's kind of tucked in there. For them, the chapel was the heart and soul of the project. You can see the Taylor house, the roof that's there, and then you can see the wider fat piece, which is the double loaded, and then the two single loaded. You can see the PV panels that are on the roof. And here's from a different direction. So again, you can see the double loaded, which is the fatter part, the roof of the chapel. At the very end is actually the Taylor house. And they had seen other work that we had done, and they really wanted a project that was part of the landscape. And they really appreciated other projects where we were kind of really building into the landscape. So here's a view of the chapel sitting in the reflecting pool, and you can see the skyline of Toronto in the distance, the ravine on the right-hand side. And then here's a view of the Taylor house on the right. So 1850s, and then the new building on the left. And you can see they wanted a very large porte cochere to have drop-offs, and people would be protected from the weather. The driveway that you're seeing is all permeable pavers, but below that there are 63 geothermal pipes that go about 250 feet into the ground, and it provides all the heating and cooling for the building. So it's a really important component of the whole mechanical system. And here's a view from the city sidewalk looking at the project. So what you're seeing are a series of vertical sunshades that actually help to provide sun shading for the rooms on the other side. This is a view in winter. So the Taylor house is all in brick, really fine brickwork. And the owners of the Taylor house owned a brickworks in the Don Valley. So they were kind of showing off what their brick company could do. And we wanted there to be a relationship between the new building and this existing heritage building. And so here you're actually seeing a kind of weathering steel shaped piece and a kind of a powder coated aluminum. And so none of these pieces move, but as you move along the building, you read the color as part of the experience. So different angles, it'll read more color, and other parts less color. And then in a way, in winter, what you're seeing are all the single loaded corridors and the residents' rooms, which typically look into the ravine. This is the lobby. And what you're seeing on the left is the chapel, the reflecting pool. And then one of the things we did is we designed these benches all the way along. So we didn't have glass that goes right to the floor. We actually stopped the glass and have these benches. And so I think that from the sisters, they've said that they really love the benches, because at any point when you're walking along any of the spaces, you can sit and talk to someone, and you don't really need a chair or a kind of and so you can be with your rollator, and you can just use a bench to sit at any point, and it becomes a way of kind of really providing so much possibility for informal conversation. And here's a section where you can see, this is a section through the double loaded portion, which is kind of rooms on either side. And from the second floor, all of the sisters can go directly to the second floor of the chapel. So the chapel is a 2-story space and sitting in the reflecting pool, and really for the sisters, the heart and soul of the project. So you can see the entry where you're looking at the reflecting pool. You're just at this lower height about to enter the chapel. This is a view from the second floor that sisters can get to directly from their rooms. What we did is we brought they had their monastery, as I said before, Morrow Park, had over 500 novitiates. It was a huge facility. So we actually selected and brought the Stations of the Cross from one of their smaller chapels and brought it, we restored them and then remounted them in the new chapel. So they were bringing something from their old home to their new home. So here you can see the shaped portion of the balcony of the second floor. We designed all of the altar, the ambo, and all of the kind of pieces of the liturgy. And we wanted it to be really transparent so that you could really see the landscape. We didn't want it to block the landscape. And this idea of pushing and pulling in and out was really important. And the idea that you could see the water, you could see the landscape beyond was for the sisters really essential to their new home. And they loved their previous chapel so much, but they said they couldn't tell if it was snowing or raining because it was so enclosed. So this kind of connection to nature was really fundamental. And then the eternal flame, we were asked to design for them and to think about it. And so we created this as part of the kind of grouping at the altar. And then again, you can see the landscape, different places to sit outside, to come inside, and accessibility was kind of fundamental throughout so that sisters, especially ones that have Alzheimer's or dementia, can actually be in this very contained area. And there's actually a lot of overlook and kind of, and so I think it's, worked out well for them. And then this kind of question of water being really part of the experience, which I think was really fundamental from the very beginning. And then the chapel, which kind of is the centerpiece, and you can see how it's connected to the second floor so that it really allows access for sisters that are more infirmed. So then the last project is actually a Taoist temple. And Taoism is one of the oldest religions in the world. So with Confucianism and Buddhism, this is a very suburban part of Toronto. So this is a community that came, the founder of this group, Master Moy, came from mainland China to Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong to Toronto in the early 70s. And from this first temple that was a converted house in downtown Toronto, the community has just grown and grown and grown. And most people, start off by doing Tai Chi and then become members of the congregation. So, so this is a cantilevered space which allows them to do Tai Chi. The interior space, which is really a place of worship. So they chant, they kind of they light incense. So it's a whole kind of connection between you and your ancestors. We designed all of these light monitors that are connected to motorized skylights. And we started off with a really simple model. When they saw this model, they said whipped horse because it reminded them of a certain Tai Chi move that was both asymmetrical but in balance. And so they loved the idea that it was kind of not asymmetrical, but also had a certain harmony to it. And so these are some very early models we did of the inside of the space. You can see the kind of light monitors. And then this gives you a sense of this very suburban neighborhood. So right next to the temple is actually cul-de-sacs and very kind of big houses, and it sits at the edge of the outskirts of the city. In plan, it's really simple, where when you enter, there's a service zone with a small kitchen, accessible washrooms, an elevator, mechanical room, and then there's a main hall with all the skylights, and then a memorial hall where you honor your ancestors. And what we did is a double cantilever. So this kind of cantilevers on one side, and then there's a second cantilever on the other side with structure in the middle. And you can see the skylights that are illuminating the space. And just the way we kind of detailed it so we could kind of get really good cross ventilation all the way through the project. And then the way that they actually use the space, which becomes this big overhang in the summer. And they have all kinds of different, groups doing Tai Chi. This is a view at night where you can see the two cantilevers, people park underneath it. And again, it's kind of asymmetrical, but in balance. This is a view from the north side, looking at the main arterial road at the south. On the left-hand side, you can see the elevator, which brings you from the ground floor up to the second floor. On the two sides, we really were concerned about the privacy of the neighbors and making sure that there was no overlook or views. And then you can see through the structure, the kind of congregation. At the entrance, we created a blue canopy so you would know where the front entrance was. There's an outdoor terrace. And then as you enter, that is the deity Wang Dai Sin that the temple is named after. And then a view of the main space. So we designed all of the altars, so the one in the foreground, the one further back. We actually used a wire brush cedar for the walls that have a texture to them. And this is the memorial hall where you'll light incense to honor your parents and your grandparents. So part of it is that the incense goes up to the sky and connects you to your ancestors. So that's, I think, gives you a kind of overview. And I think if anyone had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But I just wanted to share, quite a range of different religions and different groups that we've worked with. And we're very fortunate to have really entered each of these communities and worked really closely with the group to really understand who they were and work with them to help them realize their vision for their future. And it was very much a privilege to be part of each of these communities for time to really allow them to do things that they probably couldn't have done without any of these spaces. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything you have that I can answer.
First, I want to thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. I found it interesting. You showed 3 different types of religious buildings, the Jewish one, the Tao one, and the Catholic one. And in all of them, light is such an important element. And I just find that the way that you use that and brought the light into the building fascinating. Why do you think it is that light and spirituality are so connected that way?
Oh, I think it's a pretty powerful connection. I would say, first of all, light is free. You don't have to pay for it. And then I would say, like some of the images I showed at the beginning, it actually talks about where you are in the world, your latitude. And so in a way, if you are in a more equatorial climatic zone, the light is very constant. And you're having to kind of shield the light. In Canada, where we are at 43 degrees latitude, I would say, again, you want to welcome the winter light in, but you want to shield the harsh summer light. So every location globally has different challenges. And what we really like is that it tells you about who you are and where you are in the world, because you can't move, you don't move some people move buildings, but it doesn't happen very often. They really are about a specific place. And so light is so connected to that understanding of place. So for us, it's, there's just so many ways of doing it, but I feel like you need to be thinking about the community that you're working with and what is the way to use light to really help them to really give, a meaning to these daily rituals that they are part of.
Gail Francione has a question building off of what you've been talking about. She says, I love the concept of using the light within your latitude. How do you find out about the light and what angle it comes at? Where do you find that?
So I think, I mean, those are all easy things to find, and partly it's how you study them. So in a way, I think I showed some physical models, sectional drawings, where we're always trying to study the kind of angles of the light to kind of test the ideas that we have and to say, will they really work, or is it just, you know, going to be okay or not? Or so I think you might have an idea, but if you don't study them and test them, it doesn't, you know, it could not be that meaningful, or it could really work. So I think we really put some effort into doing that to understand what the qualities are. So the same space in May is going to feel like a different space than in February, than in November. And so again, the light changes through each of the different months of the year, right? So
Gilbert?
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful presentation as always. But what I was curious about, you've used different materials to baffle light into the space, and as you were saying, shaping it. And I was just curious, you know, the different woods obviously have a different quality to them, but then with this Corten steel in this image that's currently on the screen, have you noticed that the different materiality is creating the kind of quality of light that you're looking for? Or was there a surprise when you ended up using material and found it doing something completely different but still beautiful?
Yeah, well, in a way, what you're seeing in this image is that there are quite deep fins, and then there is windows at the back of those. And we wanted the windows to be able to open up to get really great cross ventilation, but we wanted to create also a certain privacy. So from the street, you know, they didn't feel like they're on display, they're kind of just doing their thing. But from inside, you get great views out and you get really good light. The skylights, or the light monitors that you saw in this space, are a bit different because they're actually kind of catalog skylights on the roof, and they are all motorized. And then those red rings that we did are kind of almost like a baffle that shapes the light as it enters the space. So there's a few different things going on. The exterior is doing one thing, you know, creating these kind of floor to ceiling openings that give them great views outside, but doesn't kind of put them on display. And then also allowing it to open up. So in the summertime, and they don't, like, it is air conditioned, but they very rarely use it because they don't really need to. Then also when they're burning incense, like Chinese New Year's is right now, there's like so much incense, my goodness. It's like really like, it's like a fog. So you can actually open up the skylights and clear the whole space out like in a few minutes. The floor is actually a terrazzo floor, so it's actually very utilitarian, and all the ashes, anything that drops, they just sweep up, and it's very sort of pretty functional.
Can I ask a
Wonderful.
question?
Sure.
Have you ever worked in a dramatically different latitude? And if you do, or if you were to do this, what would you have to do since this is so important, you know, this
Yeah.
very particular light at your latitude?
So we're actually working in Hawaii and Honolulu. We have 2 projects there. They're not sacred spaces, but it's been a challenge because it's actually like, I think where we are is 10 degrees north of the equator. So like at 6 o'clock, it gets dark, right? And then at 6 o'clock a.m., it gets light again. So it's a very constant light as opposed to the seasonal light that we're used to. And we've just had to address it in different ways. So it's been really interesting working in a kind of more equatorial versus a more seasonal latitude for us.
I have a comment about the Sisters Chapel, which I think is, I would love to be there. The water and how you integrated the water all around, it affects the calmness of the space. And I think it's really important the corridors that you showed that the sisters could stop and sit. And, I mean, that's just so important to people, to everybody, but especially people that, have need that in their life at that time of life. So, and the whole idea of the upstairs where the sisters in the infirmary could participate in that. I mean, I just love how you integrate water, and it's not just, oh, there it is, but it's an important integral part of what you design. So, and I know that you do it in spaces that don't have natural water right there.
Yeah, one of the things, partly because we really spend a lot of time observing before we do anything. And, in the previous monastery the sisters had, it was so huge. And we were there one Easter service, and they wanted to light a fire to bring it into the actual chapel, but their chapel seated 500, like it was 500. It felt more like a cathedral because it was so big. And so they had a little hibachi, and they lined it with aluminum foil, and they lit it all up, and they were going to bring the fire to be part of the service. And they had lived, they had been in that building since 1960, so they knew the building. Most of them grew up there and had lived there for a long time. And so they were very careful, and they set off the fire alarm, and it was like this fire trucks came. It was like just crazy. And it was sort of like, oh no, what did we do? So part of this whole thing of the chapel is that you can, they actually we have a place where they can light their fire for Easter. You can see it from the inside, so those who can't go outside can watch everything from the inside. And there's a ramp that comes up and connects in, and they can do a procession from the outside right inside. And it just, so for us, this kind of, they really wanted this inside outside condition, and just enabling them to do things that they wanted to do in their existing building, but it wasn't that they couldn't quite do it, but it was not so easy. Like it was like a lot of effort for one little flame, whereas we really wanted this kind of visual connection and this sort of sense of unity between the inside and outside.
Well, it is gorgeous, just gorgeous.
We are about at the end of our time. So again, thank you so much for coming, Brigitte. We really appreciate the time that you took to be with us today.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and also very nice to see old friends that I haven't seen for quite a while, and just nice to reconnect. So thank you. Great.
We're very grateful. Yes.
Yes.
Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.
bye.
Blessings on
Bye.
your work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.